In this video, I'm going to talk about the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. This is one of my favorite books, and anybody who is in dentistry or business, really for that matter, should read this book. And the title, I'll go over briefly what it is, and then I'll pick out some specifics and how it can apply to you and your dental practice, and really taking that next step in growing your practice and turning it into the business that you had always envisioned it being. But first, the one thing, really, it comes down to what the title is, and that is we live in a world full of distractions. Think about it, and especially if you're a practice owner, you have, your employees that you have to manage and deal with in multiple different facets every single day. You have your patients, you have the clinical side of it, you have the marketing, you have things from the building itself and making sure things are maintenance, like everything's running together. That's not even including what you have going on at home with your family, friends, everything like that. So the one thing really helps you cut through the noise and define clear objectives that's going to move the business forward and where you should ultimately be putting your time. And, I work with a lot of dentists and do a lot of marketing for practices. And the one thing that I find that separates the rainmakers, the practices who are just killing it and growing and adding more and more docs and employees, from the ones who are struggling and are worried that, they don't know where their patients are going to come from next, is they don't have a system in place. And that is what I'm going to talk about in relation to this book. So those practices that I had mentioned earlier who are struggling or who are not succeeding the way that they feel like they should be, it's because they've spread themselves too thin. They are trying to do everything in the business themselves, or they're micromanaging. And I talked about this with Dr. Robert Pick recently, who was saying you need to be the CEO of your practice. And that really resonated with me because that's the one thing that I have noticed time and time again is the micromanagement and people not being the CEO of their practice tend to be the ones who are struggling. And in this book, according to Gary Keller, there's something in here he talks about gambling with your time. And he said, if you're gambling with your time, you may be placing a bet that you can't cover. And so it says, to achieve an extraordinary result, you must choose what matters most and give it all the time that it demands. And so this really requires getting out of balance in your work life. You need to think, what is the one thing that I can be doing in the practice that really only I can do? And I need to focus my time, like laser focus my time into that one thing and delegate the other tasks that's going to help push that one thing forward. And so this is how this ties around to marketing. When I see doctors who are trying to do all of their own marketing, they're doing all the, talk with their patients and the case acceptance and trying to train their staff and do all these different things, you have spread what valuable time you have across the board. And so what happens is when you chase two rabbits at once, it's an old Chinese proverb, you catch none because you're not actually focusing in on one thing. So for example, let's say that you're really wanting to focus on, getting greater case acceptance in your practice. Well, what are the things that you can be doing and that only you can do to ensure that you are fulfilling that goal? Well, one of the things that you can be doing is actually just getting the training that you would need in order to get a higher case acceptance, being sure that you're the one, talking to the patient at some point about, the severity of their procedure or what needs to be done and what, won't happen or what could happen if they don't get that done. And then everything else from, scheduling issues or, marketing, whatever else, that all needs to be delegated to someone else. And so ideally what you would have is you would have a marketing system set up to get new patients in the door without you having to touch it, with it running like clockwork and with your staff handling all those new patients coming in, getting them scheduled, not having to talk to you about, okay, when should we get this person in or can we work around this? No, you need to be like hands off of that. That needs to be all delegated so that you can focus on your one thing. And in this case, it's case acceptance. And so here's what it really talks about. Some of the big ideas from this chapter, and the one thing that really talks about this time balance, is you got to think about two balancing buckets. I'm just going to read straight from here. It says, separate your work life and personal life into two distinct buckets, not to compartmentalize them, just for counterbalancing. Each has its own counterbalancing goals and approaches. And then it talks about, counterbalancing your work bucket. And it says, view work as involving a skill or knowledge that must be mastered. This will cause you to give disproportionate time to your one thing and will throw the rest of your workday, week, month, and year continually out of balance. And that's fine. You need this to be out of balance in order to get good at that one thing. And until you get really good at that one thing, none of the other things are really going to matter. But again, if you keep trying to do this, and this all in your practice, and people who are guilty of this are typically startups, because I get it. Cash is tight at the time. A lot of times they're not even hardly paying themselves. They've got student loans. They've got the loan for the practice itself. They try to do everything, and they think that they're going to get ahead that way. But the problem is they're actually slowing themselves down. And they're not going to get ahead. It's going to take them even longer. So you have to put these systems in place, define what is the one thing that you have to focus on in order to move the practice forward, and focus everything on that and delegate everything else. And once you start doing that, and if you start studying some of the greats in the industry, you're going to notice that's exactly what they do as well. And if they do it, they must be onto something. So it's not just me saying this. It's some of the experts that I've talked to around dentistry. It's from successful business people that I've learned from as well outside of dentistry. Learn to delegate. You should not be, answering phone calls at any point in the office. You should not be doing any sort of your marketing in the office. Have that all delegated to someone else, and be sure you're focusing on your one thing. And you are going to get so much further ahead and make so much more progress quickly, because you are focused. And when you're laser focused, that's where real improvements start to take place.